Pet is a movie that I've actually wanted to get around to watching for quite some time, and I've actually owned it for a number of months. But the main reason why I didn't get around to watching it sooner is because it didn't work in my DVD player because it was the wrong region. Thankfully though, relatively recently, a few weeks back at the time of releasing this video, I decided to try putting it in my console instead of a DVD player, and what do you know, it worked. So I finally got around to seeing Pet. Now, Pet is a 2016 film. It's a psychological horror thriller, you could say, and in a weird way, kind of a twisted romance, in effect. And it follows Dominic Monaghan, who is one of those actors who's a little bit quieter in terms of the things he does, the roles he takes, tends to be more of a supporting man in a lot of the roles that I've seen him in. I like the guy, I like his acting, I like the characters that he portrays, and it was cool to see him as a leading man in this film. He's certainly a well-picked cast for the role. Now, the actress who he plays off against is Ksenia Solo. Not sure exactly how you pronounce her name. KS. There's a number of ways you could pronounce that, I guess. But she plays a waitress who he went to school with, and Dominic Monaghan's character works in a dog pound. He loves dogs, loves animals. He's a lonely guy. He's getting to that point in his life where he wants to settle down, but he can't really find anyone, and he's a bit awkward, socially speaking. So he happens to be on the bus one day going to work, and he sees this girl, played by Miss Solo. And he remembers her from school. So he strikes up a conversation, but she doesn't remember him. She's moved on, basically. So from then on, his slightly misguided tactics of being a little bit socially awkward but strangely confident in some weird ways, especially when it comes to talking to her and trying to go out on dates, starts to come to the fore. And it gets to the point where he decides on some drastic measures, and the name of the film itself kind of gives that away, really. But this is not a film without its twists, and that's as far as I'll go with that. You can, if you watch the trailers, work out some of that for yourself. So if you want to go in and fully appreciate the movie, I would recommend avoiding trailers, but chances are you've probably already seen some if you've looked for a review for it. But if you haven't, I would recommend avoiding them. Now, the basic plot is what I just said, and I can't really go much further than the section of the film that I mentioned without beginning to spoil it. But as I said, and alluded to, he takes some drastic measures, and that's where the film kicks up from awkward romance to psychological thriller. And those are the kind of changes that I like to see in my romance films. Now, as far as the scoring for this film goes, and as far as the vibe and the overall feelings that I had for the movie, I was a little bit mixed, to be honest. I've watched this film only once, and that's kind of an indicator for me, and anyone who's checked out many of my reviews as well. You'll know that if I only watch a film once and review it, that's a little bit different, because often the films that I do review, even if I review them only a few days or weeks after I've watched them, I've usually watched them a couple of times if it's an outstanding film. So that kind of tells you this one probably isn't. At the same time though, the fact that I'm reviewing it indicates I must think it's worth checking out. So why do I think that? Well, the reasons why are because, for one thing, I do think this is a good movie. It's very small, it's very self-contained, it made barely any money at the box office. 10 grand is the quoted price. Not sure if that's true. It certainly did have a theatrical release, but if that is the case, that's unfortunate, because it definitely deserves to have more eyes on it than that. Now, as far as my feelings for the film, I liked a lot of the choices that were made. As I said, I think that Dominic Monaghan was a great choice. The actress as well, Ksenia, they're great. They play off against each other and with each other very well. The chemistry is great, I think, in a slightly different kind of way. And the other characters are okay. Nothing outstanding, for sure, but they serve their purpose well enough. The film is very contained, you could say, and it's one which I'm not sure if I like or not. It's not the kind of movie like The Skin I Live In, for instance, where I really don't know if I like it or not, or, for instance, Don't Look Now, where I appreciate why people like it, but I don't love it myself. It's not really that kind of film. This is more so the kind of movie where everything on paper would indicate that I should love this film. It's right up my alley. Barely any characters, one or two locations really, and just performance-based, with some graphic content, for sure, but a really character-based psychological kind of horror or thriller. I love all of those elements, but there's something about Pet which, I don't know, it's just not quite there for me, and I think it's more so toward the ending of the film. And, of course, I can't get into that. But as far as my overall thoughts, I think this is one of those movies which falls into the very rare grey area for me. The no man's land, if you will, where I definitely didn't dislike the film, or in particular anything about it, but I didn't love it either. I liked it, and I thought it was good enough to recommend, but I don't love it. And that is a difficult stance to have these days about anything, let alone a movie, because people tend to view that as a negative. Oh, if you didn't love it, it must have been rubbish. No, not really. I didn't love it, but it certainly wasn't rubbish. I could fully understand this being the kind of movie that certain genre fans would love. I would not be at all surprised if there are those of you guys, or others who haven't even watched this video, who have this as one of their favourite thrillers. I could completely understand that. It's got that kind of vibe. For me though, there's just something about it that didn't quite hit the mark. And that's strange. It was interesting for me, because there are a lot of individual things that I did like about it. It's more so just the way that they all came together, I guess, that I didn't love. But what then about the scores? Well, first of all, for the story and the plot, the way it's carried out, the essential concept, I'm going to give it a 6. It's definitely above par, which is of course a 5, and that's why I'm giving it a 6, because I think it did better than it easily could have. It's easily a cut above the kind of story and acting quality than many other horror or thriller, say indie movies, or small movies at the very least, that we review here on the channel, and there are many that I will never review on the channel because they're so bad. Just schlocky cinema, but not in a good way. This certainly isn't that. It's a decent enough story, it's got some twists in there, interesting character development. It's cool. Not outstanding, not amazing, but cool enough. Certainly worthy of a 6. As far as the characters go, well, funnily enough, I'm going to give it another 6. And the reason why is because of Dominic Monaghan, to be honest. He's by far the best part about the film. Now, the fact that he's the best, usually that would mean that I think the entire film is worth watching just for that person's performance. Not really in this case. He is the best part of the film, but I don't necessarily think that his performance was mind-blowing. He was good in the film, but again, not great. I didn't love the performance, I liked it. And I also liked the performance of Ksenia Solo as well. She was very good. But again, it's good enough for a 6. There's just something about it which, for whatever reasons, holds me back. And certainly when it comes to the supporting characters, what few of them there are, they're serviceable enough. They're not outstanding, not the brightest people around sometimes. Certainly, given some of the events in the film, they're not the brightest people around, but again, they're good enough. As far as the visuals, special effects, well, perhaps surprisingly, for a movie that has some gory or bloody imagery, you could say for sure, I'm actually going to keep it to a 6 again, and that might be surprising, but the reason why is because, as weird as it may seem, it's actually not that kind of movie. There is some gore in there, but it's much more of a psychological horror thriller than is a physical one. There's much more mental damage done in the film than physical damage. So, the visuals that are there are effective, but they're few and far between, and the cinematography of the film, it doesn't wow you. It gets the job done, but it's nothing to write home about, at least not for me. As far as the audio, the soundtrack, well, it might be sounding boring at this point, but I'm going to keep the streak alive with another 6, because for me, again, the soundtrack was decent enough, not overly memorable, but it did the job. Sound effects, sound quality, sound design, they were good enough. Above par for sure, but again, not outstanding. And finally, as far as the rewatchability and the entertainment factor, well, surprise, surprise, I'm giving it a 6. And the reason why is because, although this isn't the kind of movie that I think I'll watch myself again anytime soon, not because I disliked it, but because there are simply plenty of other films that I haven't watched yet that I want to, but also at the same time, the reason why I'm giving it a 6 instead of a par 5 is because I definitely would watch this one again if I was going to show it to someone else, and I do occasionally do that. And I think that for other people, they might actually enjoy this film more than I do. So for those occasions, it's definitely worth rewatching as far as I'm concerned. It's got some group rewatchability, but it's fairly heavy on the dialogue, so you'd have to watch it with the right group of friends, not necessarily a rowdy party crowd, more so a group of horror fans or thriller fans who specifically want to get together to watch undervalued movies, in effect. And of course, overall, as a tabulation of all 5 categories, it's a pretty simple one, 5 sixes. So of course I'm giving it a 3 out of 5, or in other words, a 6 out of 10, which is well above par. 6 out of 10 is not bad at all for a movie that I didn't necessarily love, and for me, I feel good about that score. It's what the movie deserves as far as I'm concerned, and my score is incidentally quite a bit higher than the majority of scores on the net from stuff like IMDb, Rotten Tomatoes. They tend to be more around the 50% region, so mine is a healthy amount higher than that, even though I didn't adore the film. But overall, if you haven't checked out Pet, if you're a fan of the kind of movies that I review, thrillers, horrors, these smaller, forgotten, independent kind of films, then check it out for sure. It might just become your version of Split, that thing that nobody really watches or talks about, but that you quietly love. And if this review allows someone to have that experience with this movie, then for sure, it was worth it. But that's it for this pick. Of course, I'll see you guys next time, and for now, as always, thanks for watching.